Now I'd like to introduce our host today, Jason Maganoy, Head of Business Development at St. Joseph Media. Take it away, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Chantal. So really excited to be back on Zoom with everyone today. We're doing a TL.talent workshop today. So these are professional development. It's a professional development series that we created to help you future-proof your skill set and help you elevate your career in today's really unique economy and competitive landscape. So today, Saad is the founder and CEO of Toronto-based commerce enablement platform Bonsai. To date, Bonsai has raised more than $12 million and works with some of the world's leading brands, including BuzzFeed and Complex. He's a member of the Council of Canadian Innovators, a business council of CEOs from the country's fastest growing tech companies, and recreationally, a producer of 4 upcoming feature films. Thank you for this, Saad, and looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. Sorry I can't see your faces. I'll try to do my best to speak without seeing any facial expressions as a reaction. And thank you to Jason and the St. Joseph team for having me on the talent workshop. It's a little bit early in the morning here in Vancouver. I did a cross Canada road trip, so if I sound like I just woke up, it's because I actually did just wake up 15 minutes ago. But it's going to be a great session nonetheless. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Let me know if you can see that. Looks like you can. Yeah. Jason, is that okay? Can people see? Yep.
We can. Thank you.
Great. Okay, awesome. Well, I know the title of the series is called Talent Insider, essentially Talent Industry Development Workshop, but this presentation is going to be a little bit different. In it, I'll certainly be talking about how to build an e-commerce business implicitly, but we won't be going together on, a Shopify backend, building a store and giving you top tips on how to improve like conversion rate by 5%. In this discussion, I really wanted to focus on understanding what's shifted in e-commerce in the last 10 years and what the next 10 years are going to look like. And with that, I hope that you'll have a better understanding of where different actors in the ecosystem sit and where they participate with one another, and how you think that you might be able to work more closely with each or one of those platforms. I mean, there's about 25 or 30 large internet companies these days that allow for, enable, or provide access to e-commerce for everybody out there. So we'll certainly talk in the Q&A about how you can start leveraging these platforms, but the first 15, 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through what's happened in the industry and kind of how we see our role at Bonsai in terms of participating in that shift in the industry. So here it is, the big shift on the internet, Google, and e-commerce. So when I speak about the internet, I'm speaking really broadly. I'm going to move my Zoom here in a second. Speaking very broadly about what has been happening out there and how does traffic exist. Broadly, we think about the internet at Bonsai as being containing 3 different constituent parts. One is traffic, so that's us, eyeballs, consumers, whatever you want to call it. We call that traffic. Then there's this one part in the middle called Google, which we're all familiar with. And then there's the third constituent is called vendors or advertisers. We use those synonymously, but those are people looking to sell stuff on the internet. So e-commerce and the internet, really the relationship we're trying to understand here is how do these different constituent pieces interact with one another? And in the last 10 years, it's our assertion at Bonsai that the internet was all about referring traffic. So eyeballs would go from pages, like highly populated, highly trafficked web pages, which would index on Google, which means they would show up on Google search results. And then Google would help vendors or advertisers or merchants capture traffic that was being indexed on Google. So this is kind of how the internet flowed. And that's essentially the gist of it. There was traffic, it showed up on Google, and then Google allowed vendors to index themselves on the same algorithm, and then over time monetize in the following way. So you've got websites with a lot of traffic who are moving a bunch of people through, creating a compelling value proposition around why you should visit my website. Google's algorithms are constantly scraping the internet and indexing what to show in search results. Then you've got vendors such as Nordstrom who are now advertising products on Google. So this is where Google starts to make money by taking traffic and connecting the needs of vendors to the desires of traffic through an algorithm, which is their proprietary algorithm, and allowing for vendors to run ads where the traffic is searching for what the vendor has. So this is where we added the $sign here, if that makes sense. But what's happened in the last decade is that we've seen all these traffic driving companies emerge because Google set the precedent on what it meant for the role of the internet and vendors, is that in order for vendors to access traffic, they must pay Google to advertise and place their products in front of traffic through platforms like Google. So all these other companies emerge. Each one is several billion dollars in value. Taboola, for example, is a platform which allows creators on the internet to embed related news articles at the bottom of a page. So if you've ever been on CNN and you see a post at the bottom that says, "You won't believe how big this zit was once it popped," that's the folks at Taboola who are allowing advertisers to create branded content pages with content that's related to the page above, and again, siphon off traffic and refer it to somewhere else. BuzzFeed is a huge internet company. They're built entirely on building these kind of listicles that are super clickbait, like 17 things that every basic white girl loves for the fall. And that's the kind of listicle that BuzzFeed would publish, and then there'd be programmatic ads run to the left and right, again, driving traffic from BuzzFeed away. Outbrain, very similar to Taboola. Rakuten is an affiliate link platform where essentially creators can embed links and drive traffic to vendors. Amazon has a robust affiliate program where I think something like 22% of all revenue on Amazon comes from the Amazon affiliate program. So Google set the precedent overall in the industry for the last 10 years that the way to make money on the internet involves traffic moving from source A to source B. And that if there's an enabling platform like Taboola, like Rakuten, or like Google, they stand to make money by helping facilitate the movement of traffic from point A to point B. So that's the broad kind of, essentially what's been happening in the industry for the past 10 years. What we're seeing happen now, which is very interesting, and this has only been around for 2 years, is Google has started to go deeper down the funnel of the vendor. And what I mean by the funnel is that, so in e-commerce, we track this idea of an e-commerce funnel. So the top of the funnel is, impression, product impression, and the bottom of the funnel is conversion. And every step down that funnel is tracked. But Google has now taken a position that, well, we're not going to simply facilitate the traffic going from point A to point B. We're actually going to come in and start to be the funnel itself. So if I'm, again, a consumer, I'm looking for something on Google, the vendor has a role to play, but it's gradually diminishing in value. And I'll give you a real life example of that. So if you ever tried to book a flight, here's me going from Vancouver to Karachi for some reason. And if I just type in flight to Karachi, the first search result that comes up is not the paid ad. It's not the organic ad unit. It's a Google flight widget. And if I were to go show flights on an actual Google page, not a screenshot, I would be able to complete the entire purchase within the Google search bar without leaving the fold of the search page. So within like 6 inches from the search bar, Google has now reclaimed the entire travel industry's business and said, well, we're going to take all the content and all the assets and all the information that is already populated on Google from the big travel sites. We're actually going to own this funnel ourselves because we really are the central place through which traffic is rooted, and everyone exists on Google. And this shift is really profound because we're seeing it in a number of different categories. So Google is leveraging its large supply of advertisers and is taking traffic from creators, or we call it bonsai publishers, and is essentially saying that this is not your traffic anymore, creator, this is ours. And vendor, thanks very much for all your supply of products or your supply of flights, and thank you for advertising with us the last 15 years, $1 billion in ad spend. We're now going to own your business. And Google's doing so without actually creating any traffic itself or having anything to sell. It is simply the facilitator, yet its touch as a facilitator is touching both sides of the marketplace. So that's fine. We'll come back to that in a moment. What's been happening in e-commerce in parallel is that there's these new incumbents like Shopify, which have come into the fold and said, we're going to democratize e-commerce. We're going to make it possible for everyone and anyone to build an e-commerce site. Right now in Shopify, there's about 1 million plus e-commerce stores that are live and operational with billions of dollars in transaction volume flowing. So what Shopify has said is that, well, you don't really need to be an incumbent like eBay or Amazon to actually be able to sell products directly to consumers. All you need to be able to do is create a Shopify account. For $20 a month, you can start to sell stuff, which has created an environment where the same constituents that were participating in this traffic referral business are now realizing that I can actually, with very little lift and ups and almost no kind of difficulty, start to own my customer directly. I don't need to drive customers through Rakuten to the vendor site. I can just build my own site and start to own a relationship with the customer. Because if Google's entire value is predicated on customer ownership en masse, if I can now own the customer myself, I could feasibly become Google. Of course, this is not what Shopify merchants are thinking about, but it's certainly what they could if they had the right scale. So that's happening in the background on the e-commerce side. And on the traffic side, everyone is realizing that Google's taking a bigger piece of the pie. Our hypothesis at Bonsai is that over the next 10 years, the internet will go direct to consumer. What we mean by that is that you don't need to have these platforms which facilitate the movement of traffic from point A to point B. Take, for example, Instagram Shop. Instagram has audience on their app, and they've got creators. And so Instagram has simply made technology available for creators on Instagram to embed products for sale, as you can see here, and then actually just own the entire checkout funnel on Instagram, much like Google. And it's not isolated. We have one of our clients is BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed retained us about a month ago to do exactly this: build e-commerce platform to reclaim retail revenue from Google and Amazon. And if you have a quote here from our colleague Jonah, the CEO at BuzzFeed, he says, "Content creators provide the inspiration to buy a new product, go on a vacation, or watch a new show, but don't capture much of the economic value created. We see a real opportunity for us to reclaim some of that profit." So again, what Jonah is speaking to is the gap between discovery and checkout, which is that the place where you buy a product is not usually the exact same place where you end up. Sorry, the place where you discover a product is not where you end up actually buying that product. And it's not just Jonah Peretti at BuzzFeed, who's our partner. It's everyone. Instagram's done it. Google has expanded this kind of native shopping functionality across just not just flights, but pretty much every single tab of its business. You can see e-commerce there. They've got these shoppable ads running here. If I click on these products, I can start buying them in Google. Pinterest, very similarly, has said that if you're shopping for a look on Pinterest, you can buy natively on Pinterest. Our partners at Snapchat have worked with us to build the same functionality where I can be watching a shoppable show on Snap. Here's one that we worked on called Full Size Run. It's about sneakerheads talking about what sneakers they would trade and not trade. It's a really fun show. And you can swipe up to buy now on Snapchat because of our relationship with them and actually check out. So we think this is a really fascinating shift in the internet. And what it's going to do, and this is why it's an important kind of talent industry discussion, is unlock new ways for people to participate in the ecosystem, which is not just large retailer incumbents opening up clunky e-commerce stores that involve technology licenses from Salesforce or Oracle. It's going to allow for individual actors like influencers perhaps to sell natively to their audience on Instagram, sell natively to audiences on Snap, on Pinterest, on Google, in a way that is completely democratized and doesn't require you to be a massive business with a huge, search engine optimization and ad spend budget. You could simply create a compelling value proposition on Instagram, be a really trendy Toronto influencer, and attract your audience of 10,000 people to buy products from you. And we actually would hypothesize, and we've seen it in our tests, where conversion rates are much, much higher because the level of trust I have for the local neighborhood influencer in Toronto who's recommending what handbag to buy may be higher than my trust for Nordstrom. So with all these shifts in e-commerce as a result of the change in expectation of how traffic moves, we think there's going to be a ton of new opportunities for different actors to come into the fold and participate in e-commerce. And one of the ways that we do that at Bonsai is that we work with publishers like BuzzFeed to help them capture the intent that they created. So again, we think that discovery and purchase are happening in two different places, even though GQ, for example, is doing all the work of telling you what watch to buy your dad for Father's Day. Google and Facebook take this intent, they intercept it, and they sell it back to advertisers. When a customer doesn't buy a product on GQ, they leave GQ.com and they go on the internet, they search for unrelated products, and Google and Facebook are like, yeah, this is my customer now, which is really, really interesting. And now Google's not just saying it's my customer, Google is saying it's my customer, and you're going to buy from me, even though I don't have the product to sell to you. So we work with a ton of publishers who are coming to us asking to solve this exact problem of how do we make sure that the time to value for a consumer is lower and faster, and I can actually buy a product really, really quickly in the same way that Google and Facebook are doing so. Because if I had a choice as a consumer, it's a question for you to answer as a consumer intuitively, but am I more likely to trust the curation of Google when I search for a Rolex, for example? Do I want to buy it from the Google search bar, or do I want a trusted editorialized review of why this is the best watch given the price point? So we think publishers have a real shot. We work with a number of them. You've probably seen all these logos before. And what we do as a business is provide the enabling infrastructure which allows folks to run e-commerce that don't have a reason to be in e-commerce otherwise. So publishers, I'll put it simply. If Shopify is e-commerce enablement because it gives you a way to sell stuff, Bonsai is e-commerce enablement in a way that it gives you stuff to sell. And the way we do that is we go out, we work with retailers and brands across North America and Europe. There's about 75 of them. We integrate with their platforms. We've got a very open and flexible set of APIs which they can integrate to. And then we actually take in all their products in our database. We unify them, we clean them up, we make them accessible in a format that is understandable and consumable in whatever format, whether it's currency, jurisdiction, tax, duties, whatever the criteria are. And then we make those products available for sale on a front end, which the publisher can build. So now as a publisher, I can sell, I don't know, like a Valentino handbag on my experience inside of an article without having touching the product and tapping the integrations of Saks Fifth and Nordstrom. So that's what we do at a very, very high level. And why that's interesting is because although today we work with very, very large publishers like BuzzFeed, Complex, and others, we still don't actually think there's any difference between a BuzzFeed and an individual influencer. So some of the cool things we're working on that I can share with you involve us building a platform for anyone to tap a product in our database and sell it. So long as you're selling on a channel like Instagram, on Snap, or you're looking to embed what we call shoppable widgets inside of blogs, we're making that all possible really, really quickly. And this is what it could look like. We built a solution which allows non-brands to sell products in a way that's so frictionless that here's a publisher called Complex that we work with who now have e-commerce enabled on every single touch point where audience lives so that their brand can actually retain the customer that will move around the internet without having to rely on Google, or without having to worry, I should say, about Google taking their customer away from them. Complex knows that their customer will move from Instagram to web, to mobile web, to email, to Snap. But instead of saying that we're only going to build web and then use Google to make sure they stay on web, we're actually going to build e-commerce on every single touch point and make sure that we're reflected on every phase of the user journey. And so what our technology will do in a very short amount of time for influencers as well is give them the exact same infrastructure in a really quick and easy drag and drop way. So that's really exciting. And it's, again, because of the macro level shift about how trends, about how traffic is shifting in the marketplace. So who cares? This is what we do with publishers. It's not that exciting for you as a consumer. But what is exciting is evidence of how well it works. So when we started working with Complex, we saw that about only 0.7% of traffic was clicking on a link that was an affiliate link. So if we go back, look at the companies like Rakuten and Commission Junction, which are platforms which allow traffic on publisher sites to go to the vendor site in that kind of diagram we saw before, only 0.7% of overall traffic at Complex was actually clicking on these links and going somewhere. By comparison, we implemented our natively shoppable widgets. We saw 21% of people actually adding products to bag from the publisher's experience. Now, the 0.7% click rate can vary like platform to platform. We see publishers with like up to a 10% click rate, but that's simply the click rate to get to the site of the retailer. And oftentimes, if I click on the link to this Champion hoodie or this Champion sweatshirt, I get taken to a Nordstrom page that's not even the correct product because the link is broken. And if I go there, the product might be out of stock. So in Q4 of 2019, there was about $150 million invested just in the Bay Area in startups that were focused on improving the affiliate link drop-off. Whereas here, 21% of people are actually not just going on a page to buy a product, they're actually adding that item to their cart because publishers have a native cart when they work with us. So they've just skipped the entire need to search for a product on Google. And we've been able to disrupt that entire value chain simply because of providing the correct and the right e-commerce infrastructure. So that's a really cool insight. And what it demonstrates to us is that audience are looking for less friction, not more. And that if you can present an experience that is editorialized correctly, is value adding, and is frictionless to the end user, they will prefer to shop with less clicks, not more. Now, this wasn't the case 2 years ago when we started. When we started, there were a number of people and a number of feedback we got from a significant amount of feedback we got from users that said that we don't want to buy on this platform because it's too slippery. I don't know that I didn't know that I just bought something. And it was uncommon for consumers to be comfortable with the idea of buying from a point of sale that is not the vendor. Like this hoodie does not exist at a warehouse at this publisher's location. This hoodie comes from a merchant that may be in a different country. And you might only know who the merchant is until you get to the last page of checkout. What we're finding from our data is that it's not really relevant to the consumer where the product comes from. There is enough widespread trust in e-commerce, and fraud rates are so low now that consumers have such a strong grasp of how e-commerce works that they're comfortable with the idea of spending money on a platform that has a product with a brand they recognize, but not have any idea where the vendor comes from. Because of, and we believe it's because of Amazon's Fulfilled by Amazon product, where you can have a vendor selling a product on the Amazon marketplace, and Amazon only looks after fulfillment. So you buy the product even though it may be a terrible merchant, but it's on the Amazon page. So really cool insight there. This is kind of a non-essential point. But what's really interesting is that there's audiences here that multiple parties in the kind of traffic side of the internet have, and that audience is distributed. Before it was just web, now it's mobile. There's also mobile web, there's Instagram, there's Snap, there's social platforms like Pinterest. So the traffic is certainly concentrated on Google and probably redundant on Google, but it does exist in silos. Like Snapchat traffic and behavior, Snapchat has 225 million daily active users. That traffic is probably also concurrently using Google, but it's a different type of traffic. Its behavior is different. So it's not about quantum of traffic necessarily, it's about the quality of the traffic. And the quality of Snapchat is way higher engagement. People care a lot more about what they're being recommended, what they're seeing. So we, as a result, see different purchasing outcomes on different platforms. But again, our role as a technology enabler is to be platform agnostic and just say that we're going to allow new constituents to sell on these platforms natively where they have an audience, because it doesn't matter whether it's just Google or web, it can be anywhere. So I'll wrap up really quickly, and then I'll take any questions. As a consumer, we think you can expect in the next 10 years less to no checkout friction. We think you're going to have to deal with e-commerce everywhere. So wherever you go, there'll be a commercial transaction opportunity on the internet. You will not be able to escape it. And the more and more time we spend developing this product, and the more our partners and our competitors develop this product, e-commerce will be embedded frictionlessly into every type of content page on the internet. That's for sure. In fact, we already know exactly what it's going to look like in the next 2 years. In the industry, though, what we're expecting to happen is that high intent search, so like me going onto Google searching for, what is the best pair of women's sandals, we expect that to grow. We also think that a lot of the passive traffic will be redistributed on these other platforms where e-commerce capabilities become easier. So we think that if Instagram grows in its e-commerce capabilities, it will become very easy for consumers to simply search for products on Instagram instead of going to Google. And perhaps on Instagram, they have the added trust of recommendation and curation by influencers or their friends. Or in the Pinterest example, we think that people will create boards, and that passive traffic that would have otherwise gone to Google searching for something super high intent will actually be redistributed to platforms like Pinterest. So what we're excited to be doing at Bonsai is helping those same platforms, because we work with all of them, kind of expand their e-commerce functionality. And if I were to give you a North Star or a reference of what I think the world will look like in 10 years, I think that China is already about 15 years ahead of us in terms of e-commerce capabilities. WeChat is a platform where anyone can sell anything to anyone, and it's essentially like a peer-to-peer marketplace. And you can have a conversation with a friend and send money and also sell a product that's being sold on a related WeChat store. Everything is commercial on WeChat. It doesn't need to be. It can also be a very strong messaging experience. But I think we're going to look more and more like WeChat, and we'll have a very different buying experience. I mean, there's already a discussion on Facebook with text-based or message-based e-commerce like chatbots. So Facebook Messenger already has an open API with documentation that developers can access, where you can start to build in checkouts through chat. So I can message a store on Facebook Messenger right now, and I can say, hey, I want to pick up some flowers. Can I buy this set of tulips, this bouquet of tulips? And the chatbot will detect the word tulips from the inventory of the merchant that's connected to Facebook Messenger, and then automatically charge $12 within the Messenger chat window. That technology is not being adopted, but it exists. So it's only a question of how quickly can different actors use that technology and actually accelerate the rate of adoption. But that's really it. So that's my view on what's happening, what has happened, and what will happen. I'll take any questions. I know there was nothing really tactical about e-commerce. I'm happy to answer those questions in the Q&A, because this is what we do all day long, is optimize e-commerce. But I really want to focus on showing the industry shift and articulate how the difference in traffic behavior is going to open up new opportunities for different constituents. And those constituents might include you. If you want to open up a Shopify storefront, hopefully you now understand a little bit more of the opportunities that are available to you out there in terms of actually launching e-commerce.
Thank you Thank you so much. That was great. Um, so I think I'll get the question starting. So if you guys want to ask some questions, please plug them into the chat box so we can I'll moderate them. So you can plug them in whenever you'd like. But my first question is, you know, that was a really interesting thing about traffic, and then sort of the traffic being filtered through Google, and then sort of connected into the vendors. So as more businesses move into direct to consumer, it's going to get super crowded. So now it's going to be about like, how do these businesses differentiate themselves? So a lot of us, like I have a friend who's literally going to be starting a business next week. Really cool idea. How do you stand out? Like, what are 3 tips of the trade that you can give to help your brand stand out in what will be an internet marketplace that's going to be super crowded?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's easy to say that everyone will be democratized, but like democracy is not always the best thing. It diminishes maybe the lowest common denominator. So or it can competition accelerates or it raises the bar, but democracy perhaps lowers the common denominator. I think that it'll be really hard for small merchants to compete without creating a compelling value proposition. I think that we see this all the time on the merchant side of our platform. We integrate with merchants. If you're a company that's kind of like, so I'll answer the question differently. Shopify has millions of merchants, yet their single largest merchant is called Allbirds, which is like that Vancouver-based waterproof, I think it's Vancouver-based waterproof sneaker company. And they do about $50 million in gross revenue a year. So it's a lot, but it's nowhere near the revenue of any major retailer. So it begs the question of, if the single largest merchant on Shopify is only doing $50 million a year in gross revenue, what does that mean for everybody else as you move kind of downstream there? And what it probably means is that Shopify merchants too are benefiting a lot from selling products that index well in search, and in many cases are becoming the fulfillers for Google's consolidated like shopping widgets. So Shopify is great because you build a website. It works for Google because Google's like, okay, here's a website with the stuff we can also sell. And then Google will, over time, if you're really good at indexing on search, start to take your products and sell them for you. And although you'll make money, Google will eventually start to take a revenue share where it will become crippling for you to even be able to be in business because you're paying everyone. So we'll see a lot of the risk shift to the inventory holders, and that's just going to keep happening. But how you differentiate is really by you have to develop a compelling product offering. And even the most well-reputed brands are struggling with this. Like they have to build like these inventive new collaborations as a reason to exist. So I think that if you're building a new brand, you have to be really clear on what the value is to the end user and how that value is differentiated. And the good thing about the ad market is it's really focused businesses to articulate why they should exist. For example, if you're building a direct-to-consumer e-com brand right now, like Harry's or Warby Parker, they lead with value prop. There was a middleman, we cut them out, here's our savings that we can pass to you. But if you build a brand today that's all about like ephemeral experience, it will not work. Because you could buy traffic to support experience before, but now the value of like bad traffic it costs so much. Like a bad product without a clear value proposition will get sorted by the ad algorithms. You'll end up paying way too much per impression or per installation or whatever your metric is. So I think clear value proposition around your product mix. There will probably not be this market of resellers that can stand on their own 2 legs without an Amazon or aggregator in which they exist. So if you are with someone who is buying cheap flashlights from China and keeping them in your basement as your side hustle and opened up a Shopify store, you will be able to continue doing that, but I don't think that you're going to be able to build Best Buy from doing that because you'll always exist within the machine of these larger folks, which is totally fine because it can still be profitable for you as an individual. But from a corporate perspective, it would really be shitty if that was your, approach.
My next question then is about this sort of really big shift towards privacy. It seems like people are just really concerned about their personal information on the internet now. And it looks like a lot of the drive to everything being e-commerce is that we're going to be giving a lot of information. There's going to be a lot of portals to give information throughout the internet. How do you balance the two? Like, how can you basically make the entire internet this giant, amazing store, but also know that people don't actually want to give information to the internet?
I think the objection people have around privacy on the internet relates to the consolidation of who owns the data, as opposed to the frequency of people who are receiving data or the number of individual people receiving data. If I buy something from you, Jason, I'm happy to give you my data because you gave me something. What upsets me is when I buy something from one entity and I have to log in with Facebook, and I buy something with another entity and I have to log in with Facebook again. Like, what the hell did Facebook do in this transaction? Nothing. So it's the consolidation of data with 3 or 4 incumbents, which is causing people anxiety, as opposed to the notion of sharing data. I actually am very optimistic about privacy. I don't think that people are, I think we simplify the privacy discussion and say that, oh, people want their information private on the internet, but that's just like, it's not even a good argument, because people, you need to give, like, in order for your package to be shipped to you, I need to know where to ship it. So I think if we move the privacy discussion away from, do people want their information to be private, then they should just stop using the internet, because it's a requirement for the goods and services to be exchanged. But I think it's a reasonable conversation and necessary one to say, why does my data always end up with the same 4 companies? Especially if they have nothing to do with this transaction. So that's a more meaningful privacy discussion. So I think that, there's already discussions in the US about why are all these constituents at the table in every transaction. I think that's a more meaningful privacy discussion. I think that consumers don't object to sharing their credit card information online with the place that's selling the product. They object to having to log in with Facebook, or have Google show up somewhere and follow them around the internet unsolicited.
So, I mean, you had mentioned earlier about just how e-commerce is going to be just everywhere. And this is a question from Murat. And the question is, how long do you predict it will be before brick and mortar retail dies completely? Or do you think it will die completely? Or do you think it's to be more of a hybrid offering?
Yeah, I don't think it will die completely. There's a completely different experience. It's almost like we use the Uber Eats analogy a lot. Like, you can get food on Uber Eats, but you're still going to go to a restaurant because there's certain experiential values associated with it. We don't think that retail will die brick and mortar. I think that the rate at which they have embraced e-commerce is a pathetic, horrific failure of that industry. And we know many of the people there who were like, oh man, I wish I did this 10 years ago. But this is just generally what happens. If you've got an industry that is printing money for decades and decades, and then suddenly, something changes. And the other thing I would say is that the shift to e-commerce, like in the last 3 months alone, due to COVID, the rate of e-commerce growth, I don't know what the metric was where I saw this, but according to the CNBC article, the last quarter of e-commerce growth is equivalent to the last 10 years of e-commerce growth, because e-commerce has been adopted so rapidly, and it's not going to go away. In fact, there was always this kind of well-known thing in the e-commerce industry around how slow e-commerce adoption has been in North America. Like, Amazon has been around for 20 years. And everyone talks about Amazon. It's like it's visible now, but it's been around for a long time. And consumer, especially in Canada, like, we are terrible at e-commerce. So I think that shift has been really abrupt, and realizing that there was never a reason for us to be, doing a lot of the purchases we do in person. But it's going to require retailers to adapt and focus on experiential. Like, there's some really smart retailers like Holt Renfrew, for example, which are really doubling down on experience. Like, going to the shopping mall. I mean, we spent a lot of time studying this when we built Bonsai, but the first notions of the shopping mall began, this guy named Alfred something. He was Austrian, Van Gruen. And he designed the first shopping mall. And his idea was that a shopping mall it's like a kind of like going to, like, it's a 5 or 6 hour thing. And they built these like loops where escalators would be on one side of the mall, and the up would be on one side of the mall and the down to the other. So it forced you to walk around. And that glass railings on the upper level of the mall would allow people on the lower level to see the storefronts above. And it was heavily optimized. And he invented the idea of the food court, along with the first shopping malls in America had zoos inside them, so you could bring your family and leave the kids there. So shopping was always an experiential thing. Somewhere along the way, it became so mass and big box that, these like the Targets and the Zellers of the world emerged as these like lifeless, experienceless monoliths. And then e-commerce was like, well, we can do that, but better and with less steps. And so e-commerce was born out of that. And now the really smart retailers are having to refocus on experiential and say, when I go to Holt's, I'm going to get my nails done. I'm going to shop for a bit. I'm going to go have brunch. It's going to be a 6 or 7 hour thing. And I may only buy one lip gloss for $120 from Holt Renfrew, but I'm still going to take on the whole experience. So that's going to be, and we'll see footprints of retailers go significantly small. I mean, there's Cadillac Fairview in Canada is repurposing a lot of its retail space as dining space. So I can talk about that for days, but
wow. That's really great, that idea of experience. Like, in real life, like I was talking to the chief marketing officer of Harry Rosen, and it was like, a big part of the value prop of going to Harry Rosen is finding your person. And that person who just knows you. Jay walks in, oh, Jay really loves these types of shirts. I have them ready for you. How's your week been? So that interaction is really important in terms of me wanting to go to that store. But then again, when you go to e-commerce, I find that, for everyone who's watching today, who's in the process of launching their own e-commerce, direct-to-consumer business, etc., what are some best practices for that virtual e-commerce experience that are just make sure you do these things to make sure that it's a really, really good experience for your person and they'll definitely want to come back? Because one thing that I can't stand, it's happened to me twice this week, is not getting a confirmation email after I make a purchase. Once I do that, I'm freaking out. I don't know the company that well. I don't get a confirmation email. Did they just steal my credit card information? So what are 2 or 3 things that you just make sure it's part of that transaction experience to make sure that it builds trust right away?
I would say that there's probably a list of 50 things that you need to do, and it's just a wheel, which you don't need to reinvent. A lot of people, when they build e-commerce, they go in with a view to recreate an experience. But if you go to Amazon's experience, which is obviously optimized, it's a really simple e-commerce experience that's not that sexy. So you have to wonder why it is that Amazon's experience is so transactional, and it works really well. So looking at that, you don't need to go out and recreate like a landing page and create all this additional value or what you think is value, but in reality ends up becoming friction to the end user. There's 50 things like clean imagery, coherent and robust product descriptions. Like, you never read product descriptions, as I don't read product descriptions as a consumer. I don't care about the polyester to nylon ratio. I think it's inconsequential. But the existence of that collapsible, sub-menu being there and complete leads to credibility and trust. Or like at a checkout, displaying the logos of credit card companies, even though you can put any credit card you want on any payment processor. But the fact that it says Visa and MasterCard, there's some check mark with a lockbox, this somehow implicates trust. So I think there's a lot of things that are visual which lead to credibility. And there's a question here in the comments I can see from Peter. It's what is the importance of the product quality? I mean, product quality won't affect purchase 1, it'll affect purchase 2. And there's a lot of garbage on Amazon. And they're still in business last time I checked. So I think it's about coherent, clear, organized, and just clear-cut best practice implementation of e-commerce. So you can go to Google and say how to build an e-commerce site, and there'll be millions of articles. And if you just summarize the first 10 as your requirements list, then you'll figure it out. Building an e-commerce store is not hard. It's just a lot of different pieces that you have to manage. That's all.
We have a question from Naina. What are some of the key considerations for publishers to keep in mind when considering partnerships with an e-commerce partner?
Great question. So publishers have historically always sold their audiences to advertisers. Now they're selling to audience. So they have to make an editorial decision around, are we showing a thing that is valuable and correct to the end user? So if I were a publisher and before there was some ad for some unrelated vendor and it was in a box adjacent to my content, you don't have to think about whether or not it was a good ad. I can just blame it on the ad network. I'm like, well, obviously it's an ad. It'll be semi-relevant. You don't have to click on it if you don't like it. But if then I, as a publisher who had a relationship with the consumer, now say, okay, I'm telling you to buy this product, but it's a bad product and it has no relationship to the consumer who I'm developing my content for, then it becomes problematic because you disenfranchise your reader. So alignment between what you're selling and who you're selling to is very, very important, and it requires publishers to be pretty introspective about what they're best positioned to do and what kind of products they should be selling. We have a lot of publishers who come to us who are very bullish on e-commerce simply because they want to be like these large companies we work with. But they can't answer the question of why. Like, why should I buy a product from this magazine? And until you answer, it's not a hard question, it just needs to be done. So if a publisher can articulate, well, people trust our fashion authority. We've been, we have a celebrity, stylist on our magazine who writes articles and they're an influencer, blah, blah, blah. Here's our reason why we exist. Then as long as that's there, publishers can be successful. Where we think publishers fails when they start selling products and it doesn't make any sense. The product doesn't make sense, it's a bad fit, or they haven't clearly articulated why they're giving you the product in the first place.
Is there anything out there that you can share that you've really loved? I mean, in terms of just marketing e-commerce experience, I mean, I've had a really good run with Swiss Chalet. I think Swiss Chalet is just killing it. They'll send me an email at 5 p.m. with like a photo of ribs saying, "Are you hungry?" And it's like, man, that's actually, you read my mind, Swiss Chalet. So is there anything that you're seeing out there that you can share that you think is really, really good? And, if you're looking at just an easy best practice to interact with, you should focus on that brand.
Okay, so I mean, outside of the ones that we do, obviously, our partners are the best in the world. But other than those people, I think that Pizza is fantastic. Using your example of food, I order pizza like 3 times a week. And Pizza's ordering systems are so complex. And I think it's because they've seen how, like, Domino's is one of the most active investors in technology in the US on the corporate side. They have a huge M&A and corp dev team that just focuses on technology. So if you go to Domino's and you observe their process, it's insane. So Pizza, similar in Canada, I think has done a similar sprint to be like, how do we become the tech savvy pizza company? So I think if you order pizza, do it online. It's a lot of fun. There's like a visualization where you can distribute toppings to the left and right, and it actually comes out looking like that, which is super cool. What else? I think that, I think that most sites on the internet are looking the same. Where I'm pleasantly surprised is when people use and build their own platforms in an interesting way, like Pizza as that example. But I'm really interested to see how influencers use e-commerce. Like, I've seen like influencers who are Toronto-based build their own entire robust e-commerce experience. Oh, actually, forget about influencers. Here's a better one. Barstool Sports is fantastic. If you watch that show or you know that publication, they have built a massive business, and their publisher, we don't work with them, so I can speak openly about them. They've done, from my perspective, a great job of building e-commerce across every touch point. So they invested strategically in a podcast called Call Her Daddy, which I do not watch, to be clear. But it's essentially a millennial women's gossip podcast. I'll put it, that's a polite way of saying it. But they invested in this podcast because they didn't have, like a deep grasp of that kind of millennial female market. It's very like millennial male. And Barstool Sports has built this amazing diversified commerce business on every single channel. And now Call Her Daddy has their podcast hosts endorsing products on Instagram, which are available for sale natively using checkout. And there's clips from the Call Her Daddy, outtakes from the Call Her Daddy show appearing on Snapchat Discover. These consumers, again, exist on all these channels, not one. So they built this, again, interstitial layer across every different touch point, every product they own, every publication they have, where things interact with each other. And it's now become a thing on dating apps, like hashtag daddy issues is something like you put in your bio if you are a Call Her Daddy fan. So anyways, the internet is a weird place. But I think the point is that really compelling publishers can use their credibility, their editorial power, their clout to intrigue people in that way, and then build like a really interesting ancillary business or core business in Barstool Sports' case.
Yeah, they're a really exciting media company. They're really cool. So I guess my last question then is, you mentioned it, investment. Like, is it a lot of money to just enter this space and be good at it? Like, or can I go into the direct to consumer e-commerce space and do it cheaply or for free, especially for small businesses?
This is a really good question. It's challenging because, in the venture market, there's been this kind of contraction in spending on the direct to consumer e-commerce businesses after a few high profile, founder failures. I don't think those are honestly real issues, but real issues that should cause a business to fail. But the Away CEO was, quite publicly ousted. It had issues with reformation as well, all relating to like CEO founder conduct. But it comes from an underlying issue, an underlying uncertainty around whether or not these businesses will actually become profitable, because they all require extensive spend on paid ads. So the only way that reformation can buy any revenue, or Away can buy any revenue, is not any, but most of its revenue, I should say, is through paid advertising. And currently there's been an adjustment in the cost of ad inventory due to COVID, because no one is running ads due to budgetary concerns. But in February or March, like, Facebook was on track to be doubling year over year for that same ad inventory, because they have a duopoly with Google on the value on eyeballs. So if you want to build a business, you have to go through the Facebook or Google gate, which for small businesses can be very, very challenging, which is why it's important that e-commerce be available on so many different touch points other than Facebook and Google. We think you should be able to sell products to your audience of 5,000 on Instagram as a small business. But unfortunately, because the way the supply is kind of segmented of ad inventory, it's very, very difficult. Like, we made the same decision. Bonsai, before was an e-commerce enablement platform, was an application where we were trying to get customers into our app to look at content that we had aggregated, as well as products that we had embedded within that content. We made a decision around how expensive it would be to distribute the product. And we'd be spending like not just millions, but like hundreds of millions of dollars in Facebook ads. The average ad spend for like a large retailer on Facebook is like over $200,000-$300,000 a day in Facebook ads, just to keep audience coming through. And as their dependence on that ad spend grows, it just makes it very difficult for small businesses to compete in that marketplace. You have to be really good at ads, or you have to have a really cool product. So the short answer is that the internet will become democratized in terms of e-commerce, and you'll have to leverage other channels where there's distribution built in. And my recommendation to anyone building an e-commerce store is don't build supply first, build demand. And what I mean by that is start an email newsletter list for 100 people in the morning in Toronto who really care about one particular subset, a niche. And I know it's insane, $200,000 a day, and that's nothing. It can be more. It can be $1 million a day. We've seen partners $1 million a day on Facebook. So find a niche, distribute it cheaply, and try to make sure that you can build your own demand. If you have 100,000 people on an email list who are opening your email every week when you send the email, that's 100,000 free customers you don't have to pay Facebook for. At an average cost of installation for $4 to get to an engaged. Also, there's a drop off between what ads you buy and how many people become engaged. Let's say you organically grow a list of email recipients to 100,000 who have like a consistent open rate. Then you now have bought $400,000 of value, or probably more, given the drop off from ad to engagement. So you've saved probably hundreds of thousands, maybe $1 million in ad spend by trying to find a way to organically grow your email list, which can then be repurposed for commerce, introduce commerce later. So we always say build demand and distribution first, and then find a scrappy way to throw a product in there to test whether or not people will buy. But don't build an e-commerce store, buy 10,000 units of a product wholesale, and then try to market it to people. Get people knocking on your door saying, hey, I want you for this thing. Because that will save you from having to do the Facebook, Google ad racket.
Yeah, that's that practice of building an email list and generating demand through it. That's the only thing I do here. So it's basically all that I do. So I guess Peter has the final question, and it's, if your e-commerce site deals with digital goods as opposed to physical goods, are there any additional considerations one should make?
That's a great point. How you display those experiences is different. The amount of information you show on the page. I can send an email to Jason and team afterwards where you can kind of see what the difference is and how you position those. But there is a difference, but it's arguably a better business because the margins are better. And the affiliate marketing world for services that are virtual or digital is way higher margin and way better than physical. It's easier for us to understand physical because we wear shirts and pants, and we all want to do that because it's kind of the coolest thing to do. But building an affiliate platform or having relationships where you can sell masterclass subscriptions or gym memberships is actually a way higher margin business. And a lot of those are subscriptions where the value of the customer is established by let's say the merchants. Let's say I want to sell like a Good Life membership on my website. It's like, hey, I'm a personal trainer. It's a joke, by the way, that I'd be a personal trainer. But if I were in an alternate universe, a personal trainer, I would, build a platform that's like, hey, here are my, 10-minute workout videos that, again, this is so comical for me, but build these 10-minute workout videos. And I would try to upsell a membership to Good Life. So you can do this routine yourself at Good Life. And Good Life has an affiliate program. I can embed that affiliate link for sale on my experience, building an e-commerce site. And Good Life would assess the value of that purchase as a percentage of the overall annual membership, not the 1 month membership. So now if a Good Life membership is worth $1,000 a year, they were going to comp you 10-15% of that overall value as opposed to one individual purchase. So I was talking to someone recently who was teaching me about virtual affiliate and service businesses, and they're actually way juicier than selling products.
Well, that's you just stole my business. That my 10-minute workout business was my thing. Thank you. So now, guys, forget about that. Forget you heard that. It's not like I'm launching that tomorrow, but I am. But so, thank you so much for joining us today. This was amazing. Thank you to everyone for joining us on the call. We'll be sharing the video with our members, and we'll also be posting the video again on the Toronto Life site. But This was really, really informative. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today, and have fun in Vancouver.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, guys.